Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for African News with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the African Union urges the continent's nations to invest more heavily in tackling regional security challenges. France echoes the concerns for cooperation as leaders and analysts meet in Senegal for the first International Peace and Security in Africa Forum. Suggestions are gratefully received, orders not so much, says DR Congo's leader amidst growing international pressure on the president to respect existing elected terms. Joseph Kabila reminds foreign powers that Congolese sovereignty is absolute. Activists in Nigeria want the International Criminal Court to charge the opposition's presidential candidate, but that is unlikely. The World Court's recently suffered big defeats in dropping charges for Kenya's president and suspending an inquiry into Darfur. We speak to one of the representatives for the victims in the Kenyatta case. First up, cooperation must become the rule and no longer the exception. France's defence ministers urged African nations to look at the bigger picture in tackling regional instability. Jean-Yves Le Drian called for closer coordination at the opening of the first International Forum on Peace and Security in Africa in Dakar on Monday. The African Union echoes his concerns and says nations on the continent should also invest more money in cross-border operations. Hirut Gebreselassie is the UN Special Envoy for the Sahel. She says conflicts like Nigeria's Islamist insurgency pose worrying cross-border threats.
The Boko Haram problem is not now limited to Nigeria. It's having an impact on the region. We have about 100,000 refugees in Niger, a few 100,000 in Chad and Cameroon. And so it is impacting the region and the Sahel region. On the other hand, we have also a deterioration of the security situation in Libya, which is another concern. As you know, Libya had already an impact on Mali some times ago. And so we don't want a repetition of the same scenario.
Well, our Luke Brown is in the Senegalese capital. He tells us more about why France is so heavily invested in the forum's agenda.
The French have been so active militarily and over the past 2 or 3 years in Africa, in West Africa particularly, and in the Central African Republic, and of course Mali, with the various military operations there. Stability operations here in Dakar itself on Monday. The key term really was prevention, acting sooner rather than later. The former Nigerian President Obasanjo, he underlined it costs more to act now rather than later. The cost is very clear, as is underscored by Hervé Ladsous, the chief of the UN's peacekeeping operations. He underlined the scale of prevention that's required when it's acting too late. 9 out of 16 of the UN's peacekeeping operations are in Africa, and that mobilizes 110,000 military soldiers. That's why prevention and cooperation really have been the key words of the past 2 days, as we heard from Jean-Yves Le Drian himself, the French defence minister.
Luke Brown there for us in Senegal. Well, DR Congo's president told foreign powers to back off amid speculation that he's scouting for ways to rejig the constitution to allow him to run for another term. In a rare speech on Monday, Joseph Kabila said that whilst suggestions and opinions are welcome, Congolese sovereignty is absolute. Nicolas Chemin has the story.
During a joint session of Parliament, Joseph Kabila spoke for more than 1 hour, but he didn't utter a word about the rumours alleging he wants to change the constitution to run again next year. During his speech, he targeted the international community.
We say to our partners that as long as they respect our sovereignty, we are always willing to take advice and suggestions from them, but not orders.
Joseph Kabila was probably alluding to France and the US, who both recently called on African presidents to respect their constitutions. His government has also been angered by the UN and the EU, who both call for a comprehensive electoral calendar to be published. The opposition believes Kabila wants to delay the polls.
I think the president has just missed an opportunity to appease everyone, to bring calm. Instead, he has made clear his intention not to respect the calendar. But we, the opposition, we will not let him do that.
The authorities say they must wait for the national census to be completed before they can organize local and presidential elections. But the body in charge of the census has only just been set up. Some diplomats say it could take up to 3 years before its task is over. According to the constitution, Kabila must cede power at the end of his second mandate in December 2016.
Nigerian human rights groups asked the International Criminal Court to bring charges against Nigerian presidential candidate Muhammadu Buhari. Now, they say he's tied into post-electoral violence in 2011 when 800 people were killed in unrest. Buhari is going up against President Goodluck Jonathan in next February's elections. His APC party says the accusations are politically motivated. Well, when it comes to the ICC, it's been looking into possible war crimes in Nigeria since 2010, but its clout has taken a knock recently after being forced to drop charges against Kenya's President Kenyatta and suspend an inquiry into war crimes in Darfur and Sudan. Well, Fergal Gaynor represents the tens of thousands of victims in the Uhuru Kenyatta case. He tells us that the ICC's credibility can still come back even after 2 big defeats.
The charges against President Kenyatta have been withdrawn by the prosecutor. The judges have made it clear that the prosecutor can return to the pre-trial chamber at any time in the future with further evidence on the same charges, and that a prosecution can be reinstituted. In the case of President Bashir, charges have not been withdrawn against President Bashir. What the prosecutor has said, and she's simply reflecting the reality, is that without state cooperation, the investigation in Sudan just can't proceed. If states are not willing to arrest President Bashir when he travels outside Sudan, and if the Security Council is not willing to step up to its responsibilities, well, then the job of the prosecutor is very difficult. But overall, we've seen this week here in New York a great deal of support, not just from many African governments, but from many African NGOs who have come here from different parts of Africa to express their support for the court.
So when you talk about state cooperation, the relationship between lots of African nations and the ICC has been notoriously rocky, but is the ICC getting enough cooperation from other international bodies and nations that it would need to actually get the job done?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest problems with the court's ability to work is that it is, to some extent, dependent on Security Council support. Now, some of the biggest atrocities going on in the world right now are going on in Syria and in North Korea. And in respect of Syria, there was a Security Council resolution to refer the Syria situation to the International Criminal Court several months ago. That resolution was vetoed by Russia and China. In respect of North Korea, 111 countries, member states of the United Nations, voted in favour of a referral of North Korea to the International Criminal Court. But that won't proceed because there is a widespread perception that China, supported by Russia, would also veto a Security Council resolution. So it's important to realise that, just take those 2 examples, China, North Korea and Syria, the reason those cases aren't reaching the International Criminal Court is not the court's fault. It's the fault of Russia and China, who have vetoed that referrals.
Now, Kenyatta, Kenya's president, and Sudan's leader Omar Bashir have all recently leapt on the court's recent decisions with glee. Now, it looks like they've strengthened the position of those African nations who accuse the court of bias against the continent.
There has been an ongoing misunderstanding of how the African cases reach the ICC. It's true that all persons currently charged by the ICC are African. However, most of those cases were referred to the ICC either by the countries themselves or by the UN Security Council. In the case of Kenya, there was a Kenyan investigative committee under Justice Waki, a Kenyan judge, and that commission recommended that a local tribunal be established to deal with the post-election violence. And it was only because Parliament refused 3 times to set up a local tribunal that the case was in fact referred to the ICC. But it's true that there is a perception problem. When there are all accused come from one continent, many African governments and many African citizens are quite right to ask why that is so. And as I said, there are problems where, as I said, in particular Russia and China are blocking the court's ability to investigate and prosecute crimes which are crying out for a proper justice process.
Fergal Gaynor there speaking to me a little earlier on from New York. Well, finally, South Africa's Rolene Strauss has been crowned Miss World 2014. The 22-year-old medical student beat 120 other contestants to the coveted title. Billions tuned in around the world to watch as Strauss became the third South African beauty queen to steal the London competition. Well, Strauss has thanked her countrymen for celebrating her victory with her and says the prize doesn't just leave her looking good.
Sitting here, I feel like I have all the South African hearts inside of me. They've been so supportive, and I really would like to think that I'm shining the lights back in our country. You know, we've come so far, celebrating 20 years of democracy this year, being an example for the rest of the world that unity is possible. So I am proudly South African as I sit here.
That's it for African News. Stay with us, more coming up.